Hey guys, welcome to Nerdarchy, for Nerds by Nerds. I'm Ted, and today I'm hanging out with
Ryan.
And I'm Dave.
And today we're going to do a video response to You Don't Need a Backstory.
Jump down the description below where you can find Nerdarchy, the newsletter, game weekly tips, as well as learn how to game with Nerdarchy.
Alright, so we had a special guest on our channel last week.
We did.
And Gareth talking about his new stuff, but he specifically did a video where he's saying characters don't need to have a backstory. Everything that you're doing comes out in game. You know, that if you watch a movie, you don't need 15, 20 minutes worth of this is where the character was before.
And he uses a lot of hyperbole in there. And apparently this was a very passionate discussion,
polarizing, thought-provoking. We could use terms like that
in the argument section. As
in the argument section below. I found it hilarious, the reference to the argument section, and then also to every time he brought up a page count, it grew and grew and grew. It went from like 5 pages,
20, 50.
50 by the end of it. Yeah.
It was a 50-page thesis.
It was really. I found it pretty amusing and hysterical.
All right, so I will say that to some extent, he is correct. There are characters that have come to the gaming table that I've been a fellow PC with, as well as I've been the GM for, that they just don't really care about backstories. They come in and play the game and they have fun, and sometimes things come out about their backstory, sometimes they don't, and that's all cool and kosher. Me personally, I like to invest time and energy into my character, and I'm going to put more into it based off of whatever starting level that character is. So, like Dave, he didn't even read the backstory for the one shot we did, but we started off at 15th level, so I wrote a 15th level backstory.
And how long was that?
That was probably like 2 or 3 pages tops.
Yeah. When players start handing me backstories and I see that they're pages, I just set them aside. So, and for paraphrase this, will you?
And for all intents and purposes, like, it's not always for him. If I'm going to get into a character, I want to know who this character is. So part of it is for me. Part of it is so that I know who this character is, what they've been doing, and how I can properly roleplay him.
So per one of the discussions I was having in the argument section below that video, I had a good discussion with a viewer that basically was like the idea of including too long didn't read. Like basically, all right, you can write whatever you're going to write as a player of the game. Like, just don't put the burden of having to read that on the GM. Do it too long didn't read.
Right.
So a bullet points of like these are the key things that like happened in the characters, and you can mine this however you see fit, because it is like I feel like on the one hand, Gareth's argument was more so one-sided on the Dungeon Master side of thing, of like the Dungeon Master for plot device wants things to be super open, whereas like it's kind of a negotiation between and actually I think he at one point, Gareth in his video did say like you two can negotiate on how things go, which is kind of how it works. Like it's the same idea of a session 0 and you deciding like, all right, maybe one faction wants the game to have like a Western feel, another wants it to be ninjas, but you end up on swashbucklers when you meet in the middle and like discuss what everybody would enjoy about a game like that. So
like here's the thing, like just because you don't write a backstory isn't the same as not having a backstory.
Sure.
And the idea that if it wasn't written before the game started, it didn't happen is kind of silly, and that's almost like the impression that I get, that from reading some of the comments, and like you gotta like it has to be there ahead of time. But like Gareth brings up the really good point that like when you read books and you read stories and you're in watching movies and TV shows, the stuff comes out over time.
Sometimes it's like we're going to take you right from the beginning.
And they're generally horrible.
Thor gives you a 15-20 minute story of him as a kid, all these things going on, and other stuff can come out later. So there is the possibility of having that mixture. I'm going to write a little bit, and we're going to expose other stuff later.
And argumentatively, Thor was probably the worst Marvel movie.
Oh, I love Thor.
I didn't say it was a bad movie. I said it's the worst Marvel movie.
I was thinking it. I was like, oh, it's a movie and not like film. Like the definition, like it's entertaining, But like America also loves the Fast and the Furious franchise too. So,
no, but when you look at the Marvel franchises of them, Thor did the worst. So it goes to speak like a lot of times less is more.
Or like you look at the Iron Man movie and like you get to like did that have the origin of him being captured in the beginning, or was that like a flashback that happened? I forget how.
No, it happened in the movie.
Yeah, that one did happen through the course of it. Yeah,
but that's different because that's actually like that's actually drama and action unfolding, and as part of his story.
Right.
Well, it wasn't like it was an origin story, but like it had a lot of tension and interesting, and that in itself made a good story. Like that would be a D&D adventure if you were soloing all by itself.
Yes.
It wouldn't be the backstory that happened beforehand. The backstory going beforehand, which actually they did do throughout the different movies, was him partying in college, or him having events and stuff like that, where he's speaking at it. That is more of the backstory stuff, whereas him actually becoming Iron Man, you've been kidnapped by terrorists and they're going to kill you if you don't do what you want. Right. And instead of doing what they want, he finds out another alternate.
I can't argue with that at all. I felt that of all of the Marvel movies, the first Iron Man is, in my opinion, far and above the best.
I think so like I said, and you can take lessons from that when you're doing your own backstory. Like I think like an outline is good to do, just like so you have an idea, and there are certain questions as a player you should probably answer, and these are the questions that are probably useful to your DM, right? Like your class, like that skill set, how did you acquire that? Like that could definitely be useful. There's definitely things in your background that you would want to, if you're playing 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Like if you're a criminal and you're going to have a criminal contact, like so like that's something you might want to touch on.
Who are they, where are they, and also like the idea of where are you from regionally? Like are you from near where you're adventuring at, or are you from somewhere far off? Are you like an outlander in that sense?
Have you traveled, or are you that person who's never left home?
Were you asked to carry something for a stranger? Have you ever left your bags unattended?
Yeah. I feel like generally 3 to 5 sentences for the DM, regardless of what you want to do on your own, is sufficient for them to go, okay, if I want to incorporate things from your backstory into my game, this is enough. Because that's essentially, for my micro-celebrity game with the Gobblers, when we sit our session 0, I have like a paragraph written down in a notebook, which is like 3 to 5 sentences for each character and ideas from their backstory and their plot that I needed. And actually doing a session 0 like that, where you can talk to everybody at the table together, and maybe even the players can talk to each other. They can talk about their characters. Like that's a good place for the DM to kind of disseminate that information into a format that's more useful to him to incorporate into his game.
Right.
I mean, like if you want to do that 5-page backstory, you can. But also that kind of hobbles the DM too in some ways. Like you've already kind of set ink to paper and said this is written in stone. This is how it happened.
Well, except for like no, it should be written in clay. Like that's really like the idea of like if you're collaboratively storytelling, but like you have like a monolithic idea of how that should be going and progressing. Like especially like if you set up all the conflicts for everyone else in the game based off of your character's backstory, well, no, rip that up and fold it, because that's not going to work.
Yeah,
unless everybody else agrees to have like you be King Arthur and everybody else be the Round Table of Knights. If everyone agrees to that and it's fine with it, sure. But otherwise, like, kind of get bent because nobody's going to play your game.
A creative GM can take those things that you are written in stone, and it's okay. Well, this is how your character remembers it or perceived it, but that's
But you were
not
drunk.
what it
You
is.
were very drunk.
You could have been drunk. There could have been mental manipulation by an adversary that's out there that you're not even aware
Wolverine. You've been mind F so many times you don't know what's real.
You spent a lot of time with like metal or like apparatus on your head, and you had like adamantine plates like injected into.
So you have the ability to go in and make those kind of alterations as the GM and figure out, okay, well, how do I really make this change? How do I make that become the thing that I want it to be, as opposed to what you have written?
Right. Like, I guess a good example would be like if you talk about your awesome uncle throughout your whole backstory and how great he is and how wonderful he is, but really that's your perception of him and that's how he was to you. But in the actuality, he was a real shit to everybody else.
He was a despot, basically. You could do.
Or like he always talked himself up and was a liar, so he's actually a con man. And when you come across him and he needs help because he conned the wrong person,
the con he pulled on you starts to unravel.
Yeah.
right? And that can be an awesome plot point for you as a character, especially like if you come to it. It's like, okay, you've got this legend that you're trying to live up to, and now your life is kind of, it's built on a lie. What do you do?
Here's kind of like the takeaway from that, though. Like, as the GM, the only thing you really needed was Uncle Awesome was in Player X's backstory.
Right.
How do I want to F with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's like a sentence or two, so you don't really need that much
True.
as
But
the GM.
again, that speaks back to what does the player feel that they need, not necessarily what the DM needs.
And this is also why I feel like, especially for the characters that want to do like these elaborate backstories, one, you kind of like throw it back at them and you make them explain it to you verbally, and like instead of you having to read it. And two, as the GM, if you're doing this during the session 0, you can take notes.
Yes.
And also, like the other players, depending on how involved they want to be, if it's stuff that is being put out there as public knowledge or knowledge that the players and their characters would know, they could also take notes as well as how they want to interact with that player based off of that information. So,
does that cover it? I mean, we're all kind of.
It's somewhere in between of like Gareth's 25 words. And I think really we fall more in like a brisk paragraph. So 150-esque words.
I feel
250.
like I feel like where we fall is write whatever you want to write, but just let me know the important things.
Give the DM the important
the
bits.
Cliff's Notes version of it.
But I will reiterate that he is correct. You can jump right into an adventure as long as you as the player have an idea of how to play the character that you've created.
You could discover you could discover the character and how to play them as you go along. Like sometimes you don't find the pulse of a character until you've played a few sessions, and then you figure out how I've experienced these handful of things in these 3 adventures. How does that inform the character, and how should I play him? Like, sometimes you don't find the character until you've played them for a little bit. Like, not everybody's the same.
I find that there's usually a decent amount of role-playing in session 1, especially if you're meeting the other characters for the first time. So if you don't have an idea of how that character talks, how they hold themselves, what do they look like, if you just have the mechanics of this is stats and class abilities and race, how are you going to play that character? How are you going to portray him?
You're working on it, and by session 5, you'll have it figured out.
Yeah, you don't actually have a choice, unless you're just sitting there staring at them as they talk to you. I mean, things will come out of your mouth, and that will begin to define your character. I've also heard others say that a fixed point in-depth background has actually destroyed their characters and made them get bored and lose interest of them compared to characters that they kind of like built them as they were going.
Yeah. Like, as you're playing, like, if you don't have much of a preconceived notion about who they are, like, there might be triggers in the game that you find things that you want to engage with as a character, and that starts to define the characteristic of it. Like, I don't know, maybe there's like an apothecary, and then you decide that your skill set actually matches up, so maybe you want to be in depth. Maybe your character you decide was like a country physician, through the course of the game. Like, I don't know what background that means that you actually had, maybe guild artisan or whatever. But the idea, or sage, but the idea of you didn't know that when you got to the table, but during the course of the play, there's all these unguents and herbs and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, and you basically you have the alchemist lab that you carry with you, or the medicine kit, or both, and maybe you use that stuff, and the other players start asking you questions, and then from those, you answer those questions, and then that starts to formulate who that character is, and they start to develop as the game develops. I mean, ultimately, what it comes down to, there isn't really a right or wrong way to do it. Whatever works for you personally and for your group and your game master master, that's what you should do.
I agree.
If you don't like writing backstories, then you shouldn't do it. If you do enjoy it, write it, but don't expect other people to read it. Whatever the right way to do it is for you, confine it to you and do it that way.
Right.
And,
just don't impose that on other people. Yeah. Sure, you might write a 16-page backstory. Just don't impose the idea of somebody else having to read it. Yeah.
So what do you do at your table? How do you handle backstories as a GM? How do you expect or require backstories? Put your comments down below. While you're at it, like, share, even subscribe.
You can tweet on us over on Twitter.
Right. Instagram. We also do that too.
So until next time,
Stay nerdy.